government expects the number of grant beneficiaries to increase from 18.8 million to 19.7 million people. The figures exclude COVID-19 social relief distress grant recipients, according to National Treasury's budget review that the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana tabled before Parliament. The child support and old age grants will make nearly 60% of the total grant expenditure over the next 3 years. The old age, war veterans, disability and care dependency grants will all increase by 90 Rand in April and another 10 Rand in October. Godongwana says the foster care grant will increase by 50 Rand and the child support grant by 20 Rand. For reaction, we're now joined by Hoodah Abrahams-Fayker, who is a National Advocacy Manager at Black Sash. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time. Well, some have criticized, this particular budget, while others didn't expect much changes. So just in getting reaction from you, government, of course, expects, a number of grant beneficiaries to increase, as we said in those numbers. What do you make of this then?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for inviting Black Sash for comment. I mean, in the context that we are in, South Africa's constant challenge of unemployment, poverty and unemployment is not being addressed by government. And so it's no surprise that more and more people turn to government for a lifeline to survive. And government every time makes empty promises of job creation and economic recovery. So in terms of Black Sash and making human rights real, we hold government to account to fulfill its constitutional obligation to provide support for those who cannot support themselves. So unless there is a significant shift and change in addressing unemployment, more and more people will become dependent on social grants. So as Black Sash, we definitely urge that there must be job creation, but that this must be complemented by the right to social security in the absence of economic recovery.
So in terms of just, the state of the nation and some of the issues that you've raised in terms of unemployment, and when you look at, high food and fuel prices, what do you make specifically on the grant increases that were announced yesterday? Do you think that they meet expectations somewhat, given the challenges that we are facing? I mean, also, if you look at provinces like the Eastern Cape, for instance, where we have a crisis of malnutrition, particularly as it relates to children, because of poverty. Hoodah, I think you may have been, I think Hoodah is frozen there. We'll try and see if we can establish that line. Of course, that was Black Sash just getting reaction on the budget. Hoodah Abrahams-Fayker. All right, let's take you now back to this conversation as we continue to get reaction over the budget speech. Government expects the number of grant beneficiaries to increase from 18.8 million to 19.7 million people. The figures exclude COVID-19 social relief distress grant recipients, according to National Treasury's budget review that the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana tabled before Parliament. The child support and old age grants will make nearly 60% of the total grant expenditure over the next 3 years. Let's bring in into this conversation now Hoodah Abrahams-Fayker, who is the National Advocacy Manager at Black Sash. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Hoodah, for joining us again, and thank you so much, for waiting. So we were in conversation in terms of, the reaction in as far as these grant increases, are concerned, the ones that were announced yesterday. I mean, do they meet expectation, particularly if you look at the fact that, South Africans at the moment are, going through economical challenges, and we are told that the economy will continue to look downward. I mean, what can you say in terms of will these meet demands in terms of these increases?
Look, all of us are struggling to live. Everything is just so expensive. But particularly the increase of the child support grant by 20 Rand is really quite shocking. The food poverty line is 760 Rand. The child support grant is more than 30% less than that. And research has shown, recent statistics show, that it costs more than 900 Rand for a child to be cared for and receive basic nutritionist food. So how are people expected and carers expected to care for their children, especially when you're looking at the stunting and the malnutrition statistics? We do acknowledge that there's been funding for the early childhood development program, where that budget has increased from 1.6 billion to 2 billion. But the challenge still is that you need the child support grant to be increased at least the food poverty line of 760 Rand. You know, it's not only food, it's uniforms, it's basic needs for children, and carers are struggling.
Let's now get into the COVID social relief of distress grant. I mean, that was extended until the end of 2024-25. I mean, do you think this is sufficient, or should government strengthen employment pathways, as a more permanent solution, just looking at, for instance, our unemployment rate at this point?
Yes, no, definitely. Job creation should be a priority for government. And although they've been making that promise for many years, that's not going to happen overnight. And there's an urgent need to provide a lifeline for the vulnerable. And the unemployed fall part of this category because they can't find jobs. So its government needs to fulfill its constitutional mandate and provide support for those who cannot support themselves. The COVID pandemic wasn't acknowledged by government about the vulnerability of the unemployed. But this constant ad hoc extensions is not recognizing the commitment that there's a gap for this vulnerable to be provided for. And so you have 350 Rand, which is less than half of the food poverty line. People can't survive. You can't even buy a loaf of bread every day on that amount of 350 Rand. And while the minister is saying that there will be a new and improved grant with the publication of the regulations in April, that is a bit of a concern. So we will really be taking the minister up on that and wait for April, because the draft regulations that have been published for comment, it shows no indication that there is going to be an improvement. There's no provision to increase the grant, which the president had indicated is in the pipeline. And also the additional measures or provisions that have been introduced in the draft are more punitive, because in the sense that where beneficiaries who should not benefit from the grant, those monies will be retrieved by government. And so too, if those who did qualify for the grant do not collect their grants within 90 days, it will be forfeited to the state. So the tone of the draft regulations are quite punitive, and in sharp contrast to what the minister is saying, that the regulations that will be published in April will actually be improved and new. So we really will be waiting to see what those regulations will look like.
Well, the finance minister did, try to argue, of course, that, this year's budget was trying to strike a balance between the urgent demands and, of course, the sustainability of the public finances. Just based on, of course, those expectations that you are going to be waiting for in April, what are just some of the issues that you feel were not adequately addressed in the budget speech?
Look, I mean, you mentioned the point about affordability, and government hides behind that constantly in terms of fiscal constraints not to fulfill its constitutional mandate. There is an urgency for government to fulfill those constitutional imperatives and look at human rights as a priority over fiscal consolidation. I think the fact that job creation must be complemented by social assistance and making sure that people have food on the table will actually stimulate economic growth by activating more in the local economy. So I think there is that balance that should be looked at by providing more with a lifeline they need to survive, especially when you're looking at youth unemployment. How are the youth expected to try and get jobs when they don't have a basic amount of support to be able to print their CVs, get transport and go to interviews? So those are just basics that government needs to fulfill.
All right, Hoodah, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Hoodah Abrahams-Fayker is with Black Sash, just commenting there again on the budget speech.